Good to go.
Good day, everyone. It's V the Grill Economist coming to you live, and I just want to thank all of you for listening on this special edition of Rogue Money Interviews. It's my treat, it's my absolute privilege to introduce this guest to you guys. He's somebody that I find absolutely fascinating. I love his work. I'm a big fan of what he does. You can find him on theserious and he's also cited by so many other sources. This guy is the man. Without any further ado, I don't want to take much time because, guys, you're in for it. So fasten your seatbelts, get your notebooks handy, have your pens ready. It's none other than the legendary London Paul. Paul, welcome aboard, sir. It's so awesome to have you on.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for having me on, more importantly. And good morning, good afternoon to all the listeners, and I hope you enjoy the show today.
Absolutely. Paul, there's so many things happening, man. I mean, your gift, and I said this to listeners so many times before we even brought you on the air, because I was, pumping it up there saying you were going to have London Paul on, get ready. And I said, one of Paul's greatest talents, I mean, you have a heavy background in economics. I think you have a PhD, you said. Um, you know, one of the greatest things you have is your ability to see the entire battle space, the entire chessboard, and then take the most complex of things, link it together, simplify for every single person to understand. And you paint such a picture better than anybody else I've seen out there, man. So, Paul, wherever you want to begin, whatever subject you want to touch base on, I mean, we got a lot to cover. So feel free. Go ahead, brother.
Okay, well, I guess I think we said before, and maybe start off talking a bit about Donald Trump. I mean,
sure.
There was a lot of issues in the past. I mean, I think 12 months ago I said on another radio show that, from my understanding, Trump would be elected provided they didn't kill him. And at the time, people said, well, that's impossible. He's not going to get elected. And then, of course, when he was elected, then it was, well, the electoral college vote will fail and you'll get booted out. No, that's not going to happen. Then it was, well, Obama's going to instigate martial law and stay for a third term. Well, that's not going to happen. And here we are, a week off his inauguration.
Right.
Now, of course, everybody's natural perception about Trump is, well, he's just cabal. He's pretending not to be cabal, which is absolutely not the case.
Correct.
I mean, we've got this kind of pre-inauguration period, and there's a lot of comments coming out, and Tillerson said a lot of stuff which have frightened people to do with, well, he seems to be this very anti-Chinese stance. He's made some comments about Russia. Well, this is all a gigantic game, because the plan is they've got to get into office. Once they're in office and they're then capable of making decisions, the plan, from what I understand, is they're going to crush the cabal out of existence. But they can't say too much or do too many things prior to inauguration for obvious reasons. And at the end of the day, if you're going to defeat the cabal, you're not exactly going to play your hand, are you? Because, I mean, that's the one thing they've not done for, well, decades and beyond, is not to play their hand.
Right. Exactly correct. They're not going to broadcast a bunch of internet bloggers and alt media types of what they're going to do. So that's why the alt media people are like, Trump's the cabal. I'm like, really? So he's the cabal taking out the cabal. That makes a lot of sense. He's the cabal exposing every foundational instrument that the cabal uses to propagate their new world order. He's the one exposing it and taking it out. So he's cabal taking. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the big difference, and probably, well, he is undoubtedly the first US president who can't be bought. He's self-made. He's a billionaire. You can't bribe him. You can't blackmail him. And that is going to make things very, very difficult for the cabal to have any control over him. He's got his son-in-law as his advisor. And from what I understand, that guy's a very smart guy.
Yes.
Good operator, knows he's got a track record of business acumen himself. He's not going to be bought off. He's got, nerves of steel, and he's going to do the job. And then, of course, also within his cabinet, there are, or as we would call it in the UK, but in the people who represent him in the various departments of the administration, there's people going, well, this guy's cabal. Well, the world's changing, and some people who were cabal are no longer cabal. And also, there's that saying, keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
Right.
So, what better than having them in the administration and keeping an eye on what they do? So I think there's very much that. So there's a lot of positive aspects to do with Trump that I think makes him a very, very different president than we've ever seen previously. And I think, from my perspective, we've seen him do more in the run-up from obviously the 8th of November into where we are now than any other US president before him. And I expect there'll be huge changes, and people are going to be very, very surprised by what he brings about. And he has zero tolerance for bullshit. He will just say what he thinks, and if people don't step up to the mark, they'll be out. And he made the comment, I think, at the end of his press conference where he said, I'm leaving the business to my sons, and if they don't step up to the mark in 8 years' time, I'll fire them. And that's literally his attitude. If you don't do the job, you're out, and you won't have any favourites. People are there to do what needs to be done, and I think it's going to be a long haul for the US, the UK, and other nations across the world in the new paradigm. But I think the US has got a better chance of succeeding than it would have had, and certainly if Clinton had been elected, I would have advised everyone to leave the US.
Yeah, I was feeling the same way, Paul. I was, for the longest time thinking if that crazy psychotic woman gets elected, my God, I would leave the country. I would leave the entire Western Hemisphere. I don't want to be anywhere near this person because it would be absolutely dangerous. I mean, she's so psychotic and so far removed from reality. Unbelievable.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's incredulous to think of the people who, after she wasn't elected, were demanding somehow that this is unacceptable and there needs to be another vote or something needs to be changed because our candidate wasn't elected. But of course, that's the whole nature of the Western world, is the kind of brainwashing that people have had to believe things that are an illusion. I mean, they talk about fake news, but everything's fake.
Right.
The economy's fake. The film industry's fake.
Right.
The health service is fake. Everything, every aspect of our lives is fake. I mean, people have cottoned on finally that the news is fake, but that's just the tip of the enormous iceberg that we're all aware of. And of course, increasingly more and more people are aware of it too.
Absolutely correct, man. And you put up a valid point. All this attempted purple revolution, another color revolution. And I fear this. I said, months ago, expect a color revolution in the United States. And I was speaking with John Perkins, the economic hitman, and John agreed. John warned about it, and he said, these policies that were running, roughshod in third world countries and emerging markets and in Eastern Europe, you could expect these color revolutions to come to the United States. And we've seen it with Black Lives Matter, not because it's a racial thing, but because it's a color thing in terms of like CIA, in terms of the deep state doing its thing in creating and fomenting all different types of strife and division. And speaking of that, we see this pushback. Isn't it interesting? I don't know if you've seen the quotes from Viktor Orban from Hungary. Did you see what he said about Soros?
Oh yes, basically they want to kick all him and his NGOs out.
Exactly, and the caveat there that a lot of people missed was when he said, "Well, now that Trump has been elected, we feel it is time now." And that spoke volumes to me because it's like there's a signal for ever since Trump got in. Now you see these guys are absolutely emboldened to go after these cabal, to go after the members of the cabal, to kick them out, to go after them. And one of the things with all the rioting and chaos that occurred in the United States, every single dead police officer, every single store owner that has his property defaced or destroyed, every single individual who was innocently caught in a riot, all this blame could be placed, especially even in the shenanigans that all the things that have occurred in the Ukraine, it could be placed on the foot of George Soros.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, he was involved in all the other color revolutions in Georgia. I mean, obviously he's no doubt behind what went on in Ukraine, less obviously, but absolutely. So yeah, and of course he foments trouble because it's the old adage of united we stand, divided we fall, and the whole purpose of the cabal is to divide everyone in the world on grounds of, well, it can be race, it can be religion, it can be politics. I mean, let's create a two-party political system that in reality is an illusion, and then people think they have a choice. Well, they don't, and in the UK, people keep foaming at the mouth about what the government's doing without realising that the opposition's not going to change anything. But it's that illusion, and then you wrap it up with all this divide and conquer, and of course, and Soros has been a great example of that across the world for longer than I can remember. And yes, he's a key linchpin, but I think he took a very bloody nose after the US election.
Yeah.
By all accounts, I mean, it's probably small fry to him, but he lost $1 billion, dollars, sorry, as a result of Clinton not winning the election. But yeah, I mean, he is a very divisive individual, but you ask the average person, and they just think, oh, well, he's a guy who made lots of money because, he's a successful businessman. But once again, it's part of the illusion, as we know.
Yeah, absolutely correct, man. Do you think that there's a chance that Trump will definitely go after him using JASTA? Because I know supposedly Putin had a arrest warrant out for the guy. Um, and what I'm also thinking is that Trump could possibly use the newly passed JASTA law as well as the Patriot Act to go after this guy, seize his assets, freeze it. Um, that would be something to see, Paul, wouldn't it be?
It would be. Oh, yeah, I think it's very possible. I mean, from what I understand, yeah, but the likes of Soros, eventually they're going to be behind bars. How that goes about, I suppose you've got to make sure it's, you dot every I and cross every T from a legal perspective. Otherwise, people like that will find a way of wriggling out of it. But
Right.
I'm sure this due process will happen, and people like that will be held accountable. And boy, it's not only the US; it's every. I mean, who knows how many nations on this planet who want to hold him accountable for his meddling in their nations with the catastrophic effects we've seen.
Right. Paul, what do you think is now the cabal is absolutely, you said it before we went on the air. You said they've lost the war, but there's still a few battles to fight. What do you think is the big thing that's happening? I mean, overnight we've seen we've seen a strike from Israel into western Damascus near an airfield over there out of nowhere when it seemed like Israel was communicating and getting in line with the whole Sino-Russian presence in the Middle East. Uh, the cabal has been very very quiet for the longest time. What do you think is the moves that they're working on right now?
I think it's less. I don't think they've got any tricks up their sleeve anymore. They're in kind of retreat and defense, and they're trying to protect what they've got and realizing by the day it's falling apart. I mean, the Middle East is a great example where we know the reasons they went into Syria. It was all to do with gas pipelines, and of course that Assad wouldn't buy the kind of central bank, Western central bank philosophy, etc., etc. But of course, they had a bigger plans to redraw the map of the Middle East, and of course, by failing, and they have failed in Syria. And I think Israel doing what they've done, it's an act of provocation. But from what I understand, Netanyahu's pretty much, or sorry, should I say, Putin's got Netanyahu on a leash.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine there's been some strong words dished out to Tel Aviv saying, excuse me, what the hell do you think you're doing? I mean, yes, we've heard Syria saying there's going to be some retaliatory action. Well, I very much doubt it, but I think it's just the desperation because they realized once Aleppo went, effectively, yeah, the major war has been won against ISIS and the CIA and whoever else is involved. And then it was just a question of them, well, we've got to clean up the whole country, and that's going to take a long time. Mm-hmm. Rather like Mosul in Iraq, it's the same principle. They're key cities within those nations to rid them of what, and it's not a civil war. It's a war against the nation themselves by these operatives who we know are finance trained and armed by the West.
Yeah.
Because they want race. So I think the Middle East is a huge melting pot where we're seeing the disintegration of the cabal. We've seen the rise of Iran, which I think is, or Persia, as I'd like prefer to refer to it, and they're now included. We've seen this 180 by Turkey after they realised that there was a CIA backing coup back to remove Erdogan, which failed because the Russians tipped him off. So we've seen Turkey turn full circle. So now we've effectively got Russia, you've got Syria, Iraq, Iran, Turkey. You're all notionally now working together for a common purpose. Well, when did we last see that in history? Probably never. So
right.
There's a huge change in the Middle East in that regard, and that was a key melting pot. I think the European Union, well, Brexit was seen as a big thing, and it was for the UK, but unsurprisingly, the UK voted to leave. I think nobody believed it would happen, but they underestimated how fed up the people in the UK were with the European Union. Now, we're seeing elections coming up where you've got France, Germany, Holland. Very likely they're going to get anti-EU parties elected. Italy, we know, is a huge melting pot politically. Renzi's gone. The banks are in really poor shape. The general economy is really suffering. And there's a lot of talk of them sort of moving towards Russia and China. Germany's the obvious question is what's going on there? Well, I think Merkel's probably won't get re-elected. And there are a lot of people with inside Germany, the lawmakers and commerce, are sick to death of the sanctions because I think, was it 2016 or 2015? Germany lost 6 billion euros worth of business and it's rising. And of course, they're suffering far more than the Russians are because the Russians knew what was coming and already took, action to say, well, okay, we'll just diversify trade. You don't want us to use dollars, fine, we'll stop using dollars. It suits us, we don't care anymore. So I think Europe's become a melting pot, but I just don't think the cabal have that control. And nation after nation more and more vocal. You mentioned Hungary, there's another great example. They've been pretty Eurosceptic and increasingly seem to be. And I think we're now sort of seeing the rise of that kind of movement. Now, people get say, oh, it's a popular movement, but what they don't realise now, it's just fed up of becoming the realisation of what's being done to the nation. I think people in the US obviously did. That's happened in the UK, and I think we'll see that spread across Europe. So I think it's always, for me, Europe's always been this key battleground. If you look, it was in World War I, it was in World War II, and it was all about keeping control of Germany and preventing what I call the Berlin, Moscow, Beijing axis. I mean, they always wanted to keep Russia and Germany apart, even though I think ideologically they fit well together. Yeah. And of course, now you've got this where Russia and China are joined at the hip. And whatever, one does, the other supports, and vice versa. And of course, and now you add kind of Tehran into that. And it starts to form this huge axis, and that kind of feeds into the whole One Belt, One Road thing. It's all part of that, where it stretches from Lisbon in Portugal all the way to Vladivostok in the Far East, and obviously north and south of that. Right. So the real fundamental thing, and the One Belt, One Road, and I know you mentioned this, and it is hugely interesting because the development is absolutely enormous. And they're trying to get, as well as having a maritime link for Africa, they're trying to incorporate them in a land sense. So they want to extend it all the way through the African continent. So it'd be through Europe, Eurasia, the Far East, and all the way north and south. And in the end, it pretty much envelops the whole of that continent. And I very much think the US will be part of that process. I mean, that might be a bit ambitious in terms of how they link it together, apart from by a maritime route, but who knows? I mean, we have got the small gap between Russia and the Far East and Alaska, so there are many, many possibilities how they can all be linked together. So, and that was a big death blow for the cabal, is when that all came to fruition, because it's exactly what they don't want.
Right.
A multipolar world, as we know, it's all about we control everything and we divide and conquer, and if you don't acquiesce to our demands, we'll crush you out of existence. Well, the One Belt, One Road couldn't be any different, obviously.
Right. Exactly. And exactly my whole point. It's like, for those people that say, oh, Trump is cabal and Putin is cabal and Xi Jinping is cabal and everybody's cabal and everybody's, all this stuff, it doesn't make any sort of sense. And what these people don't realize is it's this. The establishment, the cabal has spent trillions, tens of trillions, hundreds of trillions of dollars over the decades to develop a one world system, a one world government, a one world banking system. They've done so much work, and in the process of it, doing all of this, what they've also done is alienate a great deal of nations. And now, a lot of people are like, well, this whole rise in nationalism is also the move of the cabal. I'm like, wait a minute, you can't have global world government and then nationalism at the same time. That doesn't make any sense. And that's what people need to realize. That most Americans and most Westerners have no clue as to how huge the New Silk Road Initiative, One Belt, One Road Initiative is. My good friend Harley Schlanger, who's very well connected to Helga LaRouche, who the Chinese just awarded as the mother of the Silk Road, and she's the one who's her and Lyndon LaRouche were key advocates in pushing the New Silk Road and working closely with Xi Jinping and his administration to bring it to fruition. They are. They've always said, we've asked the United States to participate many times, and the U.S. have always said no, because it threatens their stupid hegemony. It's unbelievable, Paul. And look at what it's cost us. Look at what it's cost the Western world. Our industry's gone. I think when I looked at it, Paul, our biggest exports to the world from the United States is trash, recyclables, and I think pornography. That's it.
Well, I mean, yeah, pornography is included in GDP now in Western nations.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of astonishing. But yeah, to go back to the point about, I mean, the whole thing about Putin. Well, if people think Putin's cabal, here's the question: why Russia has never forgiven the Rothschilds for causing the Russian Revolution in
Right.
1950. The Chinese have never forgiven them for the Opium Wars. They loathe and detest these cabal families. I mean, Russia started clearing out in 2000, and China did likewise. They have been cleaning the decks in their nations to purge the NGOs and those people sympathetic towards the US hegemony and the Western kind of ideology. It's been a long haul, but people don't see it because obviously they don't hear about it, and if they don't hear about it, they think, well, it's I'll just take the propaganda view that Russia's communist and China's communist and everyone's suppressed there, and yeah, I recently did a kind of podcast for myself where we talked a bit about China, and I wrote an article which says, this idea, China is a one-party state. Yes, it is. But within that, it's very much a meritocracy, and that will shock people because people can, you and I could live in a village and eventually become the president. It might take us 30 years and we have to prove ourselves. And Xi Jinping did that. He ended up where he was controlling 150 million people and a GDP of $1.5 trillion US. And he proved himself. And they went, well, you can now join the upper tier of the Chinese political system, and eventually he became president. But he's got a proven track record. Well, in the UK, we had Cameron. Where's his track record? Blair, where was his track record? In the US, well, Bush and Obama, they have no track record, and of course we know the reasons why. So there's ideologically huge differences, and I always, say if you think of China through the eyes of a Western person, you'll never understand it. Right. And of course, the great thing China's always had, as a good friend of mine says, China always has a plan. We just don't really always know what it is. Well, to a large extent, we do know what their plans are now and what they're trying to do. And of course, the One Belt, One Road's part of it, but it's like gold acquisition as well. China and Russia have been accumulating huge amounts for a very, very long time, and they have infinitely large amounts. What I understand from people who know this, that both nations probably have at least 30,000 tons of gold each.
Yeah.
Well, this is why, and also they're supposed to both, at the same time they're going to announce gold-backed currencies simultaneously, and of course we'll have gold trade notes and everything, geared around a gold standard. And of course, in the Western perspective, this is impossible because it failed the last time. But we had a quasi-gold standard. We never actually had a gold standard, and this is what's coming. And from what I understand, Trump is fully aware of this. And of course, from the US perspective, is they don't have any gold.
Right.
There isn't 8,000 tons of gold in Fort Knox or wherever else it might be. And the UK's got very little gold. I think Germany's got more, several thousand tons. But we are woefully unprepared for this kind of financial system because we don't expect it to happen. And the arrogance and the ignorance of the cabal actually has worked in our favor. We'll look back in history and go, well, it's a good job they were so arrogant and ignorant, because it's what contributed to their demise, because they simply thought it wasn't possible. They didn't believe nations like China and Russia were capable of doing what they're doing. And to give an example, they thought Russia weren't doing anything in terms of military advancement, and because they looked at their budgets and went, well, they're spending hardly any money. But what the Russians cleverly did is they took a whole wad of kind of money and put it to one side and didn't put it through the official books. People didn't see they were spending and thought, well, they're not doing anything. But of course now, militarily, Russia is light years ahead of the West and have technology that the West can only dream of. But that turns out to be hugely advantageous for humanity because they were able to shift the balance, which is why effectively they went into Syria. And the Americans and the British essentially just said, okay, do what you're going to do and we're not going to oppose you. I know there's all the hot air rhetoric coming out from Kerry and people like that. But that's all it is. Yes, they still do certain things, but largely they've been curtailed in terms of their activity there. And of course, as we know, that is the key. One of the big key battlegrounds is the Middle East as well as Europe for the cabal, and hence why the European Union came about, because it was a cabal project to control via a single currency and by a single set of laws and rules and regulations all nations within the European Union. And that is why the British, whatever people may think, said we're not putting up with this, because we're not having you controlling our laws and rules. And they do to some extent, but of course, by not joining the euro, that was a huge step. And of course, Britain fudged that to avoid joining. They should have joined, but they fudged the rules to make sure the European Union went, well, you don't meet the criteria, so you can't join. And they went, fine, we're not joining.
It's incredible, man, to see this entire global shift that is occurring, and it's truly remarkable. I think. What do you think happening this year, Paul? Like, what's your take on 2017?
Well, I think we've got. I mean, we talked just before about the European elections. I think we'll start to see the map of Europe redrawn. I can't see the European Union carrying on for much longer. I think we'll see it slowly ground into dust effectively. Nation after nation will want to, and I think Italy's the obvious nation that will just eventually just go, we're leaving and that's it. Bye. We're going to adopt the lira again and we're going. And if Italy goes, the French bank's going to be in serious trouble. And ergo, will Germany, who are on the hook for, I think, 90% of French debt. So that will be the catalytic effect. I think we'll start to see the rise more and more of Iran, but not in an aggressive way, and it will redraw the map of, of the Middle East. I think we'll see democracy eventually coming to the Middle East in nations we never believed. I think that will apply right across the board. I think you'll see the rise and growth further of China and Russia, and you'll see the nations you would never have believed. I mean, I think you'll see it with the US, where they'll start to form proper relations with Russia and China more than they've ever done. I think you'll see it with the UK. So we'll expect those kind of things. We'll slowly, I suppose, start to see some movement in Africa, although that probably will be further down the line. But I think the big change that we're going to see pretty soon is with the US and Trump administration. Probably within the first 2 or 3 months, we're going to start seeing things, and people across the world are going to go, wow,
Yeah.
he said this has happened. I think he will take a very broad stick and start to make some big changes pretty quickly. And that will obviously have a catalytic effect, because I think his attitude will change. I mean, I know there's the rhetoric coming out with China, but that for me is just hot air. It's a gameplay to throw the cabal off. And I think once the US starts to say, well, we're bringing Russia in out of the cold, Russia isn't the big bad ogre that everyone likes to make out. So I think you're probably, that's going to be the focal point. But I think all over the world we'll see this advancement of multipolar kind of ideology. Nations will start to work with each other more and more. You'll see nations who've formerly been adversaries. India and Pakistan's a great example. I think they'll start to throw away those kind of that ideology and work together and go, this is ridiculous, we don't need to do this anymore. And we'll probably see further curtailment of ISIS, and certainly obviously in Syria and Iraq. I think you'll see big changes probably in Afghanistan. Of course, Afghanistan's huge in terms of the opium trade, so that's going to have an interesting bearing. And generally we just start to see the end of these big monoliths that the cabal have had in terms of the financial system. I mean, I think there's going to be some big changes for central banks, but I mean, this is probably not, it's not all likely to happen this year, but I think there might be at some point this year a catalytic event which really spells the end for the cabal. It'll become very obvious, and then we have a huge long period, I don't know, it could take several years or more for the world to readjust to how it should always have been. And it's down to every one of us. We're all part of this world, and we all can make a difference. People go, well, I'm just this little guy, I can't make any difference. But collectively, I think the world will be more about us making decisions and being more of a representation in terms of our own country as to how things are. And I think the education system will change, and there'll be a big emphasis on real assets and what's really, real value for people in terms of their everyday lives. I mean, yeah, I'm, a big advocate of gold and silver, but I think, agriculture, forestry, that sort of thing is going to be huge. We're going to see a lot of new industry coming out, because we all know there's massive suppressed technologies that already exist. I mean, it's already, you can see Trump's kind of given a bit of a side swipe at the pharmaceutical industry, and we all know. I have a simple analogy. Pharmaceutical companies only make money when we're all ill.
Yeah.
If we're all healthy, they're bust.
Right.
And I have, particular grievances in that regard, because we've all had family members who've been ill, and you think, well, is this the appropriate treatment? And they only exist because they make money. So I think we'll start to see big changes in that regard. Of course, the financial system will change hugely, and I expect the gold standard to come in at some point. Will it be this year? Well, it's possible. But, it's always better to look at event-driven scenarios rather than worrying about dates. I know everybody wants everything to end last week, last year.
Yeah,
of course we want the end of the cabal 20, 30, 100,000 years ago, whatever it might be. But it more becomes a situation with, yes, they may still notionally be around, and yes, they are still doing things we'd rather they didn't do, and they're involved in countries, and not just our two countries, but all over the world, and that will take time to eradicate. And there are some battles left, but I do think, for me, the war's over. But it's like the analogy I use for World War II. If you look at it, Hitler lost World War II when he inexplicably decided to invade Russia.
Right.
It took 3 years before he finally was defeated, and that's where I'm not saying we're 3 years away, but it's that kind of analogy. But if you want to use a World War II analogy, I think Russia's about to knock on the doorstep of Berlin again. So we might be surprised. And I think I'm looking probably the end of January to see some things economically happening or in the markets. Now I know the markets are completely fudge, but to see if we see any evidence of some big cracks starting to appear. But thus far, I mean, the bond yields have kind of dropped a little bit, which suggests perhaps people are starting to buy bonds again where they were dumping them. But that might just be a hiatus. I mean, I'm expecting the yields to keep rising, but if they keep rising, of course, that is going to sort of blow up the derivatives markets, let alone what it's going to do to the average person's mortgage. I mean, I think I read somewhere if there's a 0.5% increase in the US, it will affect 20% of mortgages. Well, and it's the same in the UK. It's not unique, and across Europe, people have got very low interest rate mortgages, but if they put them at 0.5%, they're going to wipe people out, because same in the UK, property prices are ridiculously overinflated. So they're just like many bubbles we know across the world. Now, how are those bubbles going to unravel easily? You just can't see how it's possible. So if we're going to have a 2008 kind of scenario on steroids, for want of a better word, then what's the ramifications for that? And is there a way we can deal with this? Now, I don't doubt Trump knows exactly what the problems are for the US. And I think that's why he wants to have a massive infrastructure rebuild, because he thinks, well, if the US is going to have its own currency, which I think it will do, if it's going to be gold backed, which it has to be, we haven't got any gold. Okay, how do we manage that? Well, not very easily. Maybe you could lease some gold off the Chinese, but that's debatable. Okay, so if the US ends up with a devalued dollar, then obviously from an internal market, you want to regenerate the internal market hugely, because it's going to be cheap. Obviously, there's this idea what he's going to put tariffs on exports. Well, we'll see what he actually does, because that would be kind of suicidal, given that US imports are going to be ridiculously high anyway.
Yeah.
Because of the devalued dollar. So, but I think the stimulation of the internal markets, hugely important. And there's always this, what's going to happen with this reset? The reset, and everyone's jiggling. Well, I'm going to buy these currencies because I'm going to make a fortune. Well, that's just not reality either. The reset's more to do, from my perspective, with a gold standard and how currencies will be pegged against that. Now, if China's got a huge amount of gold, which they have, and Russia have, okay, what's that going to do to their currencies in relation to nations that don't? But Mexico's got assets, it's got a lot of silver, so maybe it can back its currency with silver. So it's quite complicated, and I've spoken to a lot of people, and no one's really has any certainty as to how that aspect's going to work out. So when people say, what's this reset, the question is, I don't really know. I mean, we know in broad terms what that means, but the kind of fine detail, I think, we're some way off understanding. And I don't think even all of the major players who are talking about this even really know how this is going to pan out exactly.
Right, exactly. I think the only template that we have is the classical gold standard from 1870 that ran all the way to 1912. I think that's probably the best thing that we can go by.
Yes. Oh, yeah, and that's the problem. Of course, all the anti-gold standard people always go, well, we had a gold standard and it failed after World War II. Well, yeah, because it wasn't a gold standard; it was some quasi standard. But actually, we're going to kind of peg it in some way, or give the dollar some credence in relation to this gold standard. So, well, so effectively, of course, we know that's nonsense, because the dollar's just a promissory note ultimately, and therefore it was logical to decide to have that as some benchmark of the Bretton Woods Agreement. But so yeah, you're absolutely right. We have to look further back, and the thing is, it's the old view. If you get past the idea that we will always have US hegemony and the world's always going to be the way it is, once you decide you can accept that that's going to change, then a lot of things are possible. But this is why political commentators and everybody keeps coming out, well, this isn't possible, it can't change, and therefore the ideology is, well, if the dollar's going to go down and all these currencies are going to fail, well, we're going to have the SDR. And for me, well, the SDR is a basket of basket case currencies. How is that a solution?
Yeah.
To the economic woes of the world? It's just another variation of what the cabal would want to see, and it's not going to happen. I mean, yeah, China's joined it, but they didn't join it because they embrace it and see it as the solution to the global financial economic woes. Absolutely not.
No, I agree with you. I've been saying for quite some time, any move that China has with the SDR is just lip service. It's just it's lip service. It's getting people to understand that China is a major player on the world stage. I mean, look at the alternatives that China has to the IMF. They didn't set up the AIIB, just so it could play, second fiddle to the IMF. I mean, China's been funding the IMF for the last 2 years. In fact, Christine Lagarde, who I call the giraffe-necked woman, Christine Lagarde, she's always wearing a scarf, by the way, Paul. You ever notice that? Ever since I started calling her the giraffe-necked woman, she's been. You can time this. This is weird. CJ, can you verify that? Ever since I started calling her the giraffe-necked woman, she started wearing scarves more often.
I'll start researching it.
I think you're actually. Do you know what? I think you're right.
Yeah. Lagarde was one time about a year ago. She said, "Don't be surprised if the IMF moves its headquarters to Beijing." I see the IMF going the way of the World Bank and everything else that the Western Kabbalists have put together, Paul.
Well, yeah. It's the old adage: they either evolve or die. I mean, if they want to be part of the new world, they're going to have to change. But yeah, absolutely. China's set up. I mean, people think the AIIB was just set up for some kind of fun and games because, China feels excluded from the SDR or things like that. Well, therefore they're going to set up this alternative. Oh, now they're in, they won't bother. Well, the AIIB is just going to grow and expand. And you've got the Development Bank, you've got the Silk Road Fund, you've got SIPs, you've got, they've got their own, they had the launch of the gold-backed yuan. Sorry, not the gold-backed yuan. They had, obviously, in terms of their own gold fix. Sorry,
the Shanghai Gold Price Fix.
Yeah. Gold price fix, yeah, and that, of course, was a huge step. And what I can say was kind of interesting. Back 12 months ago, it was said to me that there was a belief early in 2016 that the proverbial would hit the fan and then it'd be all over. Well, it turned out, from what I understand, China was supposed to, in March of 2016, was going to launch the gold-backed yuan, and then, of course, Washington at the time said, "Excuse me, if you do that, it's a declaration of war." So China went, okay, well, maybe now's not the time to do it, and they kind of backed off. But at that point, they were serious about doing it. Now, of course, now Trump's in. There's a completely different mindset, and I think there's going to be a lot more cooperation in this regard, where it's less of a, well, this is not a declaration of war. Okay, if this is what's happening, how are we going to make it work, rather than trying to fight it? But that's what I understand was supposed to happen, and of course, undoubtedly, it would have been a declaration of war as far as the cabal were concerned, not just Washington. I think London and every other capital in that regard would have said the same thing.
Yeah, I agree with that, man. I've heard the same thing. I think President Xi Jinping and Trump will work well together.
Yeah, I mean, there's been all this hot air coming out about the South China Sea and all these trade barriers, and Trump's annoyed with China for what they've done to the industrial base, blah blah. But this is all just playing games. The reality is, Trump knows he's got to work with China,
right?
And China knows it's. I mean, look, at the end of the day, it's in everyone's interest to have a strong US, but a strong US that's based on solid principle, not the kind of flaky insanity that's run the US for the last 100 years or more. And that's been the big problem. Now, if we get over that, it's in everyone's interest to have that, and China knows that, and Russia knows that. And therefore, they will work with Trump because they see this as the first opportunity they've had in a very long time as nations to be able to work with someone who is going to be sympathetic and realize it's in everyone's interest to abandon this US policy. And of course, this is where it's going to get interesting, because people say, well, how's Trump going to finance this? We have this idea, this big idea of a massive QE and stimulus to to fund all his infrastructure programs and everything else. Well, here's a radical thought for you. Perhaps he may take the enormous military budget each year and say, well, actually, do you know what? We're not going to go around stomping around the world anymore and funding all these kind of covert operations, etc. We know what we're going to do. We're actually going to take a substantial slice of that money and invest it internally in our own country. Now, people will say, well, he can't do that. It's impossible. It's not going to happen. But I wouldn't rule it out. I think it's a very, very distinct possibility. That's precisely what he will do.
I agree with you. I mean, our military budget right now is about $600 billion. And when you look at it, Paul, what they're actually producing for that $600 billion is an absolute abysmal joke. They've given us failure after failure after failure of military equipment. It's a catastrophic joke. The F-35 is a garbage airplane. The F-22, chokes its pilots at 20,000 feet. The Stryker is a waste of money. The M1A1 and the M1A2 Abrams is absolutely useless against even the Russian T-14 RMR would absolutely destroy it in the battlefield. The industrial complex, I like to call them the military industrial marketers, because that's who's running the military industrial complex these days in the United States, are market men, are madmen. I mean, these are guys who create advertisements. That's what they should be doing. They should be working on Fifth Avenue instead of the defense industry. That's what they should be doing. They should be doing adverts for women's handbags, Paul. That's what they should be doing instead of trying to sell us the next great battle tank. I mean, it's horrible. So yeah, we could definitely, cut that in more than half.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, it's just a matter of common sense. But the problem is, it's ideologically, everyone, has been conditioned to believe that the world's the way it is and these things can't come to pass. But if we just sit back for 5 minutes and go, well, hang on a minute, let's think about this logically. There's huge changes that can be made. I always said, and I've said this in the past to people, if the government like the UK wants to make some changes, it could do things within 6 months to a year that would absolutely radically change the fortunes of the nation. It's not rocket science. We've just been led to believe it is. So where there's will on all sides, and I think increasingly there is, and there's still some resistance, and you've got odd nations, particularly in Europe, where Merkel's very resistant, and we know kind of why she's resistant. But this resistance goes away, and as more and more nations come on side and go, well, actually, the multipolar world is the way we need to be, and it's not just going to be the smaller, persecuted nations of the world who want to adopt this. It's going to be the big nations eventually, and more we'll see. I mean, Saudi Arabia is an example where the House of Saud's hanging on for grim death, and they are desperately now wanting to preserve their leadership and their rulership, but they can't do it without the help. So they're now starting to covertly talk to the Russians and the Chinese and say, well, can you help us? And this is where we're going to see the change. Turkey's kind of flipped. I think we're starting to see evidence that Japan's flipped. I mean, they've obviously been a vassal state of Washington since World War II, and they're starting to change. I mean, it's quite quiet, but you're seeing a lot of strong relations being built between them and Russia. And I think, obviously, the arch enemies always been China. I think we'll start to see that barrier broken down as well. And you're seeing more and more of these vassal states dotted around the world who have been, there primarily as a kind of large military base and an operational base for the cabal to exist out of. So Saudi Arabia, obviously Japan's another one, Germany's the classic one in Europe. So as these nations fall away, the impossible becomes a reality and very much will come to pass. And this is going to surprise people. And of course, a lot of these political commentators aren't going to know what's hit them because they just think, this is not possible. And so I see a lot of people come out with some good research, but they always end up going, but this can't happen because
exactly.
the US hegemony is here forever. And it's not. I mean, if they think it's here forever, why did it's failed in Syria? It failed in Ukraine. They're just two obvious examples.
Oh, then they tell you, well, that's all part of the plan, Paul.
Oh, yeah, of course. It's to convince us that they were going to do something, but when they didn't do it, it's just to lull us into a false sense of security. I mean, yeah, of course, it's just incredulous. And Ukraine's a great example where Putin was aware of what was going to happen a long time before it happened. And when I got told quite a long time before the coup happened, look, this is going to happen, but you don't talk about it publicly because Russia they're quite happy to let this happen because ultimately it will damage and deeply damaged the cabal, which it has done. And what's happened in Ukraine? I mean, practically the West's walked away from it now as an embarrassment, and all they've done is destroyed the nation. They've economically wrecked it, which of course they always do. And the question is, can Ukraine survive as a nation? Well, it's pretty unlikely. And what's going to happen? Will it be split into 3 or 4 countries possible? Will the East actually cede and join Russia like Crimea did? Well, it's a possibility, but the whole plan was to drag Russia in, and of course, into a war. And Putin went, "You must be joking. I'm not stupid. I know what I've telegraphed what you're going to do, and we're not going to fall for it." And then, of course, there's all these Russian sanctions based on spurious reasoning to do with what they're supposed to be doing in Ukraine, which they're not. But Russia obviously got wind of that and went, "Well, we'll just diversify our trade and we'll avoid this." And of course, they've done that pretty successfully. The Russian economy has actually survived, and it's starting to get a bit stronger. So.
Well, Paul, I mean, the Moscow Stock Exchange was the best performing stock exchange of 2015. It was the best performing currency, the ruble, of 2015 as well. So they've done quite well. I mean, here's the funny thing with the cabal: how idiotic are they? They think they're going. How are you going to isolate any country that's a trading partner of China?
Exactly. Well, it was like the whole idea that the TPP was going to succeed, but we just will exclude China from it. But don't worry, everyone, it's going to succeed. It's just insanity. I mean, eventually, it was just going to break down and not be successful. But of course, and that sort of galls me a bit, because as much as the mainstream media are annoying, to put it politely, there's a lot in the alternative media who love to spread the fear, and they'll grab every bit of fear they can. And some of them made a good living out of scaring people half to death with half truths and absolute nonsense. And of course, all these organisations was, the TPP, they're just going to take control of everything, and yet they never once sort of ask the fundamental questions, which of course you and I and many others do. And it's important to get that balance right, that people realise these are just hot air projects that were never going to succeed, because a lot of nations were browbeaten into deciding they wanted to join. And of course, in Europe, we had the same thing, where increasingly nations went, "You know what, we're not happy with this." And then another nation would stand up and go, "No, we're not happy with this either." And that's why they've all ended up in disarray.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. Paul, we got about 5 minutes left, man. How can people follow your work? How can they follow you and your podcast and your contact information? Go for it, sir.
Right. Obviously, well, you've already mentioned the website, which is theseriousreport.com.
And spell serious. People will type in SERIOUS like it's serious.
Yes, good point. Yeah, it's obviously SIRIUS.
Like the star.
As in the star, yeah. So that's obviously the website. We've got a supporting Facebook page, which is just The Serious Report, same spelling. Now, we do have podcasts, which we have people who have paid subscriptions. Now, what that is, we do 5 podcasts a week. They're roughly 10 to 15 minutes, normally Monday to Friday. That's covering some sort of geopolitical, financial stuff going on, some intelligence, things we're aware of, just an analysis of what's going on. And that's been going since October, and we're doing quite well. That costs $4.75 a month, which I think for 20 odd podcasts a month is pretty good value. And the information is very, very concentrated. What you get in 10 or 15 minutes is pretty heavy going, as some of the subscribers say we have to listen 3 or 4 times because there's so much information in there, because we do try to pack as much in as is possible to do so. And we've just launched a supporting closed Facebook group for that, for the podcast subscribers, which is just obviously The Serious Report, but it's called Premium Members Only. So that's just for the members so they can access additional information. I get a lot of stuff on a regular basis, and some of it I'll put in podcasts, but sometimes it's just a blanket article comes in or something of interest, and I'll just post it to give people additional background information. Of course, we encourage all members, they can get in touch, ask questions, and that's in essence what we do. There's a very underused Twitter page, which is obviously The Serious Report as well, and that's effectively what we do. And you can register on the site for the podcast. If you go to the home page, there's a thing called it's called Premium Content. And if you go to there, you can then register, and if you like it, you can join. There's plenty of people who've put some references for what we do, and You can join if you like it for a month. If you don't, I'm fine. But we'd like people to join because it helps to support the amount of work we're trying to do. And obviously, it's great to be working with you guys as well. You say it's a privilege, but equally likewise for me.
Same here, Paul. I mean, going forward, Rogue Money, we're going to be doing everything we can to help you and help your work, really expand your audience and bring you guys to the next level. I'm excited.
We really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Paul.
Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And folks, thank you again for listening to this broadcast, special Rogue Money interviews with London Paul, who is an absolutely brilliant mind. I love his work. Subscribe. Listen to me. You want an intelligence briefing, and I don't get paid a penny to say this. I'm telling you right now, you want a great intelligence briefing, go to the Serious Report, go to the premium site, subscribe to his podcast. It is like having an actual intelligence briefing every single day, 5 days a week. Listen to it. It's a treat. The global perspectives that Paul brings is absolutely refreshing. So please go forth and check that out. With that being said, guys, again, you can follow us on Twitter at the Rogue Money. Check out roguemoney.net. And that's about it. And we'll see you all back later tonight for Rogue Money Radio. So take it away, CJ.